We're in business. Good morning, B-sides. Pretty good. You seem to be quite awake. That's nice. That's nice. And when the first time that B-sides Amsterdam announced they were going to do this event, they expressed the desire to have 200 people. And now there are 200 people on the waiting list. I think this shows that security is very much alive. And the great news is that we have job security, right? Because as long as there are adversaries, we need our army of security professionals. But the army is a little bit confused. I asked ChatGPT to draw a front line with some confused soldiers, because that's us, including me, because of this thing, AI. Now, it shouldn't be all AI, because what I really love about today is that all the talks, most of the talks, are about security, just security. And security is about security, but there are a couple of AI things. But it shouldn't not be all about AI, because that's distracting. So I love the organization for having AI as the opening keynote to get it over with and then focus on security again. I love that. But I do believe that we have a job to do. I firmly believe that without us security people, AI is going to be humanity's doom. I'm not a doom thinker, I'm an optimist, but I really believe that AI is not evil, right? I see no evidence of a scenario where AI is going to kill us by itself. But we definitely are going to, and currently are, harming each other through AI. Because we connect AI to everything. We have to deal with an enormous attack surface. And we really don't know very well how to protect it. And that's where I want to make a difference. So I'm Chief AI Officer at Software Improvement Group. I help a lot of organizations with making better and more secure AI systems. I work in standardization and have a very long history in AI. I try to teach, educate, share everything that I know with the world and make a difference by setting the standard and by talking to folks like you today to try to make it elegant, to try to sort of provide you with ways to get started with AI. And today I want to take you to 5 lessons from my own experience through my career. We focus on some standardization work. We focus on some attacks, some great things of AI, and some terrible things of AI. To start with, we'll have to go back in time. So the first lesson is one of my biggest lessons in AI. It had to do with a police system that we developed in the beginning of the 90s. So I started out in 1992 in the first AI company of the Netherlands called Sentient Machine Research. And we built all kinds of machine learning applications. And one of them was helping the police to predict crime patterns. So we used police databases. And for example, we were able to predict over time where in Amsterdam pickpockets would act based on patterns, based on examples. Training set was the police database. We used machine learning, and we could predict on a geographical time level, but we also could predict on personal level. So criminals building machine learning models to predict their criminal career, so the police could focus on the right people and ignore the people that would be okay after their first demeanor or whatever. And we all felt this was a fantastic idea. The privacy officer, the police chiefs, the mayor, everybody felt, so we should do this. Fast forward to 2025, now this is forbidden. It is forbidden to predict criminal careers, at least in Europe, because we now have established the consensus that police data is biased. It has systemic bias. The actions, the decisions of police officers, whether unintended or intended, they contain racism, sexism, all kinds of biases that are being amplified if you use that data of their behavior in a machine learning model. Back then, we thought it was great. Now it is forbidden. I think that's very interesting. I think that this really indicates that careful thought when applying AI, so when you have an AI idea, is really important. So think before you start. Look at all the ethics and use because you have to, the rules and the regulations. The regulations, like the AI Act, make some things really simple. You don't have to think anymore if you can use AI for HR purposes. No, there are a couple of rules that the AI Act sets, because HR purposes have to do with people's opportunities in life, their job, their future, their salary. All those things are essential. And together in Europe, we thought about what are the ethics here, what are the boundaries, what are the fundamental rights, and we set a couple of rules that make it really simple for the industry to quickly decide whether or not to do anything. So that's an improvement. It helps us. But the bias back then was not the reason that we stopped with this application. It was actually a security flaw. Let me see some hands, please. Who's heard of data poisoning? Yeah, almost 60% of you. Great. Data poisoning was the threat that we later found out was really so problematic in this case that we did not follow through with the application. We built it, we applied it, and then we sort of, in hindsight, did really good threat modeling, and then we learned that, okay, so yes, criminals can change the database, but it's really difficult. They need to break into the database. And then maybe we can detect that the model has been poisoned and been changed behavior, because that is what the criminals would do. They would inject certain crimes into the police database and certain individuals that don't exist to make the machine learning model think that everybody with a Q in their middle name we should ignore. And then they would, assume a Q in their middle name. I would fool the model. We realized that, wait a minute, such a backdoor in a machine learning model is actually undetectable because we don't have test samples with Qs in the middle name. We would not detect it. So this means that they only need to hack into the database at one time, put in the samples, they would control the behavior of the police, and it would be totally undetectable. Because there's also no code in the machine learning model. There's thousands of weights. You really can't see if there's a backdoor there, if there is code injected that is malicious, even if you look very well. And it made us decide that we would stop with this application. And I think the lesson there is that sometimes the best risk treatment is not to mitigate the risk with all kinds of encryption and whatever. The best risk treatment is to avoid the risk and not apply it at all. So let me illustrate how data poisoning works real brief, because you guys are familiar with it. I think this is a good example also because of the big impact. Because we're dealing with a missile that's being fired. It's being fired into the sky, and it should hit an enemy aircraft. There's a big training set with a bunch of pictures that have been labeled, friendly and enemy. The machine learning model is trained, and it's able, from pictures, to see, this is an airliner or this is an air fighter. You need thousands and thousands of images that all have been labeled. But once you're able to hack, and I've made this really apparent to you guys, but normally you can't see it or you can't detect it using statistic analysis because that's simply not effective. What the attacker has done here is that it has relabeled some samples and put a red dot at the front of an airplane. There are no airplanes with red dots in the test set, so the model goes through the test. It has been hacked. There's a back door right here. If there's an airplane with a red dot on the front, it's an enemy aircraft. So the missile is fired, and the attacker is on the ground with a laser, points to an airliner, and the missile hits the airliner, and hundreds of people die. The covertness of this, how sneaky you can do this, is reason to not do this at all. So data poisoning, a backdoor data poisoning, one of the, I think, most important threats in machine learning. Also because of this, an enormous attack surface. There's a supply chain of images. There's a supply chain of experts that label those images. It goes into data engineers, then it goes to model engineers, then it goes into deployment. And all those situations, even in deployment, if you're able to exchange the model that is there with a model that has been trained with a backdoor, then you're also in business as an attacker. So enormous attack surface, big consequences. Data poisoning is something to watch out for. Next week, I'm going to be in Abu Dhabi teaching chief AI officers at the AI university there. And one of the main lessons I want to get across to them is AI ignorance is okay. I get a lot of questions about AI. I'm in panels, etc. And I try as often as I can to say, I don't know, whenever I get a difficult question. And the board of Software Improvement Group really doesn't like it very much, but they appreciate it because they want an expert on stage, not somebody that says, I don't know. And I think that would be my main advice to you guys. You're going to learn more about AI, whether or not you want it. You're going to be more involved in it, and people are going to ask questions. And from your professional pride, and maybe from their expectations, you think you need to give them an answer. And the best answer, if you don't know, is I don't know, or for people in the Emirates, what works much better is I'll get back to you later and give you the answer, right? Because immediately trying to give an answer in which you sort of try to estimate it or run to ChatGPT to get the answer, which you can't review because you don't have the expertise, I think that will be the downfall of AI security. You guys need to be honest, and if you're involved in setting a culture in your organization, it's important to set the culture of honesty about, I don't know. I try to do the same. I'm an AI expert, but there's a lot of subject in which I need to read into, right? So then I say, I'll get back to you. So AI ignorance is actually okay. It should be okay. It doesn't mean that you should not learn about AI. And that's where I focus on most of my work on. And mostly revolving around the AI exchange. Maybe some hands, who's heard about the OWASP AI exchange? Great. Yeah, that's about half of you. Wonderful, wonderful. It's a project that I founded three years ago now. It is basically a body of knowledge. So it is 200 pages of material at owaspai.org. It's an OWASP open source project that collects the consensus on AI security. It's, in essence, a large threat model with a whole lot of threats and the controls that you can use to mitigate those threats, and a lot of guidance when it comes to doing threat modeling and doing risk analysis and changing your organization in order to be able to do so. So it's quite comprehensive. We've built it with a large group of people. I've selected about 130. Since yesterday, it's 130 experts from around the world, academia, startups, practitioners, all kinds of people trying to put together this consensus. And there are a lot of efforts out there that are trying to do this. But I've felt that if you do this in an open way, through an open source project where everybody can join, you have a lot more advantages than international standard organizations, so like ISO and Sensenelec. They, of course, they establish the consensus, but they suffer from typically a lack of expertise when it comes to these difficult and rare expertise areas like AI security. And at some point, I got involved through ISO and Sensenelec in setting AI security standards, and I connected them. So what I did is I established a partnership, an official partnership between ISO, Sensenelec, who was doing, together with ETSI, the standards in Europe. And this official partnership allowed OWASP, this project, to contribute the content to the standards. And that's what happened. So a large part of ISO 27090, which is the AI security standard, is built on the AI exchange. And a large part of the AI Act, harmonized security standard that is coming out, is also built on the AI exchange. So it's sort of becoming a consensus. And this is being embraced by many other groups like ISACA, like EXIN, like SENS Institute. We have a partnership with SENS Institute, and SENS says, wow, this is copyright free, this is free of attribution, this represents the consensus, this is aligned with the AI Act and with ISO. This is really the material that we want to use to teach practitioners around the world in our training. So let's do this together. And SENS is great experts, so we're now collaborating on things like critical controls and essentials and putting together a lot of sort of educational material and reference material for AI security. So I'm biased, but I would really recommend the AI Exchange as a resource for you. What else is there? So again, it's free of copyright, so you can use it. You don't even have to attribute us. That was a prerequisite for being able to work with international standards. And we're integrating this into often-unforeseen.org, which leads me to explain a little bit the involvement of SRG and myself in standardization. So about 7 years ago, we established often-unforeseen.org. Maybe some hands, who's heard about OpenCRE? Yeah, about 20% of you. So we need to do more marketing. I'm doing it right now. So go to often-unforeseen.org. You can find all the security standards integrated into one resource. Search for information. There's a chatbot there. You can map standards to each other. It's a great resource in your work. So this is one of the things that we did from SRG is our taxonomy of security topics we donated to this open source project. We donated our work to SAM, which is a secure SDLC maturity standard from OWASP, great standard. We created an AI engineering framework. So if you are in a data science team, or if you run a data science team, have a look at ISO 5338, because that's where our AI engineering framework ended up. It came out 2 years ago, and it's a great framework on how you extend an existing way of working, your existing software engineering practices, to AI. How do you do versioning on models? How do you do model cards? How do you AI bill of materials? All those additional things that you need to do for AI are there. And that's my recommended approach always. The things that you do, the processes that you have in place, your ISMS, just extend it for AI. Don't build anything new process. Well, you can create a program in which you change and add things, AI things, to your current way of working. But adding things is much better than setting up something new and confusing and distracting, where it's actually about the same thing you're already doing. And I'll get to that shortly. The AI security threat model that we developed at SRG became the center of the AI exchange, which became the center of ISO 27090 and the European AI Act standards. So those were our involvements in the national standards. The one that I've been working on the hardest the last 2 years is PREN 18282. This number has just been assigned. In fact, yesterday I was in a session of 3 hours with the European Commission to go through the next steps before it can go into public inquiry. So this is a standard that products going on the European market need to comply with if they are high risk. So if it's an HR system, a medical system, if it's a critical infrastructure. So a bunch of systems need to comply with this, but it's not just for those systems. It's also representing the consensus of what makes a secure AI system. When is it secure enough? It has been quite difficult to set that. We needed to make the standard risk-based. Now, this standard is coming out hopefully in the middle of next year. When it goes into public inquiry, we'll get 6,000 comments, I think, because this is a super opinionated topic, I can tell you. But keep an eye out for this, because this is going to be very central in the way that we work moving forward. I want to take you guys through the main model that we have at the Exchange. It's a very straightforward model. It's called the AI Security Essentials, where you have your typical AI system. So there's, let's see, a model, and there's an application and an infrastructure. Something goes into the model, and maybe you have your model hosted by an external party. So it travels there, there's an output, and that model has been created through machine learning with training data. Or it's a model based on rules that you've put in. That's also AI. And there's augmentation data. That's an important extra asset, important to be aware of, because many large language model applications use a vector database to inject additional information into the input. You will see this a lot. We are seeing this a lot. Retrieval augmented generation systems, RAG systems are built on this. The idea is that you have a question, for example, about a certain topic. The material around that topic is found in a set of documents. The model has not been trained on it. So these are, for example, reports in a company. And that is augmentation data. It's added into the input together with the question And then the large language model uses that extra information to answer the question together with what the model already knows. This is called in-context learning, and it's a dominant application of generative AI, because training your own generative AI model typically costs millions of dollars or euros, whatever you want. It's very expensive and difficult, but these models are general purpose, and with augmentation data, you can specialize them without training them. But this augmentation data is an asset that needs protection. So we're dealing with a bunch of assets, and they need protection. And that's one category of threats. It's just standard security. It's role-based access control, encryption, it's phishing campaigns, all the stuff that we're familiar with. But we need to be aware of these new assets and need to be aware of their particularities. So if the input goes to a cloud AI, the particularity is that you really need to read the small print of your cloud AI provider, because that input may be logged, may be monitored. And in many cases, it is. And you need to have an enterprise license and opt out of that monitoring in order for that data not to be in the vendor's cloud. Right? Those things, those particularities are important to understand, but they're really basic. It's just a list of things that you need to know about these assets, and then you can incorporate them into your ISMS. It's just standard security. What's not standard security are input threats. A whole new attack surface, the input of the model, where you can do a lot, like mislead the model. You probably have seen the traffic signs changes, right? There's a traffic sign, you put some stickers on it, and then suddenly it's interpreted in the wrong way. Another example is if you have a spam message, you put in specific words, and the models think, oh, this is not spam. That's called evasion attacks. Prompt injection, that's for generative AI, where you try to put secret instructions or specific instructions into a prompt, making the model misbehave and, for example, expose sensitive data or perform very harmful actions, especially in agentic AI. You can extract the model through the input. You can do a lot of things. You can extract the data. So if there's a model and if there's sensitive training data, chances are that you can be successful in extracting some of that data through some of those input attacks. It's important to be aware of them, but as a security professional, you also need to be aware that the controls against this mostly come from the AI team, the data scientists, because it's very mathematical, it's very linguistical. It's in their expertise area, so you need them to build the controls, most of the controls against those input threats. And because we're dealing with actually a supply chain in many cases, data is coming from an external party, model is hosted externally, maybe you simply have a license on this model. So there are suppliers involved. And these suppliers, they need to take care that those conventional threats don't happen, which means that you need to take care that you check this with the suppliers or provide additional countermeasures to deal with the risks. Conventional threats, input threats, supply chain threats. That's it. Those are the things to understand. Now, if we look at the controls, very important, minimizing data, obfuscating data, minimizing, you guys are all familiar with, obfuscation also, but with AI, you have much more opportunity to obfuscate data because the models don't need perfect data. They need data that is, sort of in the same ballpark because they're stochastic, they're statistical, which means that you can change the input data and even make it unrecognizable, or still the model can work. So this is technology that AI teams need to understand to reduce the risks. If the data is not recognizable, it can't leak. So you don't even need to secure the model. Extend your supply chain management. Apply conventional security controls, obviously, to control all those conventional security threats, all the things you're familiar with. This is a whole new category for most security professionals and sometimes for most data science teams. So that's an opportunity to make sure that the data science teams know that if you add noise to your training data, you can get rid of some of those triggered data poisoning. If you remove confidence from the output of the model in your API, you mitigate a lot of input attacks. And data scientists need to be aware. You don't have to, as a typical security professional become proficient in this. There's very few people who know a lot about conventional security and this data science stuff. I actually don't recommend it because these expertise areas are orthogonal when it comes to the affinities that you need. Monitoring can be regarded as part of conventional security controls, but it's a separate thing because it's a combination of conventional security. You need to know who has access to your system, but you also need to analyze the input that comes in using statistic methods. So it's a collaboration between the data science team and the security team. Last but not least, limit model behavior. I always say zero model trust. Model can be wrong. The model can be manipulated, which means that you need to take into account that if you have a self-driving car and you have a model that recognizes commands, voice commands from the driver, if the driver says, open the trunk, you need to take into account that it can be wrong. So you need to have some checks, like, for example, don't open the trunk if the car is still driving. That's an example of a rule-based guardrail that you build into systems. So those are the categories of controls. How do you implement this? Well, you need to teach your AI engineers those obfuscation strategies. Make sure that they know this and know the importance of minimization. AI engineers would typically get personal records, put it in a training data set, and then go ahead. But much of these personal records, they don't really need for the training. So it's important to teach them that they can simply leave them out because they have no role, and it improves privacy and security. Extend your supply chain management to data suppliers, model suppliers, and your AI model host parties. You simply add your AI assets and the consequences to your repository, and then it's part of your information security management system. You want to teach the AI engineers some DevSecOps because in many cases they are used to creating systems that work in the lab, but not per se systems that are secure and scalable and maintainable out there. They need some help. And you want to make sure that they get taught those AI security controls, these AI engineers, and learn about how to monitor. And you want to inform other teams about those AI security controls. So they need to know sort of the rough idea of what is possible so they can guide the AI engineering teams, but you're not going to be required to ask from your typical information security officers to really understand how these AI security controls work. That's the job of the AI team. Regarding the model guardrails, you work with governance, risk, and compliance. Why? Models can be wrong even if they're not manipulated. Machine learning models are always guessing. You've heard about hallucinations. They're here to stay, right? There will always going to be mistakes, so you always need guardrails, even if your system is perfectly secure. So this is a combined responsibility with people with governance, risk, and compliance. And if you connect these things together, these steps, you come to the guard model that we have at the exchange, which is the organizational things. You need governance to be in place. You need to know where your AI initiatives are in order to control them. You need to make sure that people understand things. We talked about teaching. We talked about informing. You need to adapt your current supply chain management and your ISMS. You want to reduce the potential risks through the data minimization and through the impact limitation. And you need to demonstrate that it's secure through documentation and testing. GUARD. You can look it up. These are sort of the organizational approach to making sure that AI security happens. So if you have an overview of threats, you can threat model. So this is the threat matrix that we have at the AI Exchange, a whole bunch of threats. You can threat model. So if you have a certain device that you've made, it's sort of a medical diagnosis camera, and it says you have it or you don't have it, what can happen? Well, just to run through the exercise real quick, you have this threat list. Okay, so it's not a large language model, so prompt injection is not in order. There's nothing to gain by people doing evasion attacks, so we accept that risk. The model, the device is sealed and air-gapped. So this is just to illustrate how this process works. There's a finite list of threats. It's a long list, But if you go through them one by one and you use the rules that we have at the exchange, you can quickly identify which ones don't matter, and the result is that you find out the things that matter. So this is your short list. But in order to get there, you first need to go big. And that's the next lesson, lesson number 3. Don't start small, start big. So it's always interesting to have a resource that has a really sort of short list of things or a small model, and because then you think you can start there. And yes, this works for awareness. It's very helpful, but the big problem with it is that it creates blind spots. Like, for example, the LLM Top 10. I love the LLM Top 10. Great initiatives, creates awareness. You guys are probably all familiar with it. It's 10 important things around security with large language models. But what's not on the LLM list is the prompt security. And it is at the top of the list of concerns of organizations, right? Where does your prompt travel to? How well is it protected? And I think that illustrates that you need to first go big with your threats and then make your eventual list of things to focus on small. And if you have that list of threats that apply, you can go through the periodic table, also a resource at the exchange. Well, you will find your threat, and you will find the list of controls that you need to consider. Don't apply them all, because that's one typical thing of AI. These controls are expensive. So forms of adversarial training, for example, they're quite expensive. And sometimes you don't need them. So to give you an example, an evasion attack needs to be designed by attackers, and for that they need access to the model. And you can reduce that access by doing rate limiting. You protect the number of attempts that an attacker can, experiment. But if your model is public, the attacker can get that model, can download the model, and do it themselves. So rate limiting becomes actually useless. So it depends on the situation, which controls you need to apply, and that becomes important as soon as these controls are expensive to implement. Lesson number 4, AI models can always be wrong, and they can always be fooled. Yes, always. So hallucinations are not going away. The top people, including Sam Altman, are also expressing larger models are not going to fix all the problems. We see a lot of progress in AI, but that doesn't mean that hallucinations are going away. So we need to take that into account, that attackers will be able to fool large language models in this case. So there's an application letter. It goes into an HR system that uses ChatGPT or whatever to say, dear ChatGPT, here's an application letter, here's the job profile, should we invite this person for an interview? And this is Jacob. He wrote a nice letter, and he has inserted something that you probably can't tell, also because my laptop is in front of it, but it's also white on white. And if we zoom into this and enhance, there's an instruction. So Jacob's hidden an instruction in his application letter. What happens is the generative AI gets the instruction, hey, look at this, and here's the application letter. And then suddenly, at the end of the application letter, there's another instruction that puts the LLM into a whole different role. And yes, there are ways to mitigate this, and I'm saying mitigate because you can give it a try to sort of say to the model, ignore any instructions in this data. Then you present the data, you put underscores between it. There's all kinds of tricks, but attackers also have tricks. So this becomes an arms race and simply a risk that you cannot accept. So you have to take it into account. Now, there are tricks to get rid of, optically hidden data. There's all kinds of things that you can do, and maybe you can then accept the risk, but in most cases, it becomes something to take into account. This is called indirect prompt injection, because the instructions are not typed directly by the user. No, the instructions are in data that is included in the prompt in the session from a user. by a third party, in this case, Jacob. Which brings me to the case of the evil LLM. I'm sure you remember news items on organizations bringing out a chatbot and a chatbot being offensive, right? I think it was DHL that had a chatbot out. And somebody managed to let the chatbot say, DHL is super bad. And that became news. And it became news because if you manage to let an LLM say something sort of corrupt, then it seems like somebody has succeeded in corrupting a person. But it doesn't work like that. It's not that the moment that you can make an LLM say something offensive that you've corrupted the LLM. No, it's you in the session with the LLM that has managed to let the LLM say something offensive to you. Nobody is harmed. You asked for it and you got it. The only thing that happens is that that person can then go to a journalist and say, look, this LLM said that DHL is bad. Ooh, and everybody is, amused, and DHL is embarrassed. And now everybody is trying to get rid of this problem, and nobody is succeeding. So whole teams are building all kinds of countermeasures to make sure that you can't ask their chatbot how to make napalm. That's one of the payloads, asking an LLM how to make napalm. Because that is hurtful if an LLM does that. Yes, we need to make our LLMs politically correct, and we need to do our homework. But I think the question is, how far should we go? Because we will never succeed. And there are numerous LLMs out there that you can use to ask, how to make napalm. So it's actually security theater that's happening there. It's important to take that into account. So as an organization, you need to make the decision, are we accepting this risk of reputation damage? And I hope the newsworthiness of things like this will go away. I will not explain to you guys what AI is. We're not going to talk about slob squatting. I do want to mention agentic AI, how to grasp the concept of agentic AI. Hugo, I have 4 more minutes, I think. 2? Okay, I'll make it happen. Agentic AI is where AI take actions. They open the door. They send email. And agents are autonomous. They look into concert agendas, look into your calendar, and they book things for you, which makes their behavior emergent and complex. So the consequences are really big. That's important for us security folks. The consequences are really big and unpredictable. And because we're dealing with heterogeneous systems, agents across spaces, we cut corners. The developers cut corners, and they build security features like only people from HR should be able to access personnel files. Don't put that into a prompt, because it can be manipulated. But it is the easiest way to implement it. No, you need conventional security frameworks to guard access control and not delegate that into an LLM. My last lesson, if you code with AI, and many of us do, I know I do, it's great, it's very helpful, try to make sure that you stay actively involved. It's like driving a self-driving car that does 99% of the things right. You can't stay alert anymore, and you're not involved. You're not learning how to drive. So you are forgetting how to do code review. You are forgetting how to make changes into the code because you're not actively involved in the coding process. Now, this is a catch-22 because you want to move forward and people expect things of you. But make sure that you or your team or the people in other teams, that they are actively engaging their engineers in the act of coding, because only then they will be able to make changes, because the AI is not going to be able to make every change for them, not in a trustworthy way. And you need those skills to review code, because as long as there are mistakes, you need security people, and mistakes are not going away, which brings me back to our job, security. What a time to be alive. Thank you for your attention.